Yo, what is going on, guys? My name is Brent and welcome to part 2 of our tutorial series on creating Android applications that use the Google sign-in button. We're going to jump right into coding because we've already set up and configured our Firebase Console application on the web, and we've also set up and configured our Android application already with the required dependencies, so we can just go ahead and get started with writing our app. Now, in our previous tutorial, we set up a blank activity, and now we just need to add our button for sign in to our actual view. Now, before we do that, we need to fix one small error that I made in the last tutorial, and that's in the build.gradle under the app directory. I said that we need to compile the Android GMS Play services, but actually it's Play services -auth, and that will get us our Google Play button so we can add it to our view. Next, we're going to go ahead and go to our res folder and layout, and under activity main, you can see here I've already kind of cheated and added the button itself to our view under text here. So make sure that you do com.google.android.gms.common.signin button. Make sure the ID is sign in button. The layout width is wrap content, and the layout height is wrap content. And you should see your sign in button right there. Now we're also going to add a less visually appealing button here. We're just going to add like a little small button right below here. And we are going to add the text to that as sign out, and the ID will be sign out button, and we'll use this later on. Now let's go back to our main activity and set up a couple variables here. The first one will be a private Google API client, and we're going to call that Google API client. And then we'll also set up a private Firebase auth, and we'll call that auth. And a private, if I can spell, Firebase, wow, I cannot spell today, Firebase auth state listener, and we'll call that auth listener. Now, what do these things do? The client is basically how we're going to connect to our Google services using the button. Our Firebase auth is how we're going to auth to Firebase. And the Firebase auth listener basically listens for changes in our authentication with Firebase, so it knows when we sign on, sign out, and stuff like that. Next, we're going to add a couple of constants that will help us later on. A private static int rc sign in equals 0, and then a private static string tag equals main activity. So when we first create our activity, let's see our authentication status, and we can do that with auth equals Firebase auth.getInstance, and then we want to see when we log in and when we log out. So let's set up our listener to respond to those activities. So auth listener equals new Firebase auth listener, and it gives us this new on auth state changed, and it gives us our Firebase auth parameter here. So what we're going to say is Firebase user equals Firebase auth dot get current user, and then we'll check to see if there is a user there, and if user does not equal null, that means there is a user logged in, and so we'll say log.d auth. Let's go ahead and bring that in, and we'll say user logged in, and then we'll print out their user ID basically, or how about we just print their email? Let's do user.getEmail, and then else the user is not logged in, we'll log.d auth user logged user logged out, There we go. Okay, so let's not forget our little comma or semicolon there. Now we need to set up our Google sign-in options, and this will be sent. This will be used for when we actually sign in, what we want to receive back from Google, and how we want to send our request. So Google sign-in options GSO equals new Google sign-in options dot builder, and then we'll add in Google sign-in options dot default sign-in. Now we need to tell it what we want to receive back from Google. The first thing we want to do is get a request ID token. Google will send us a unique identifier so that we can send that identifier back to Firebase to authenticate, to let Firebase know that we have a legitimate login. So we will get string, and then it'll be r.id. What is it? Default. What is it? Damn it. Sorry. String dot default web client ID. And then we also request email. And then we'll build it. And there we go. Now, some people may wonder, like, what is in the default client ID? If you control click on this, it'll take you to some kind of weird number. You know, what is that actually doing? Actually, what is happening is that Google Play Services plugin that we applied to our Gradle file down here, what it does is it looks at our Google Services.json file and looks at the client ID, which is an OAuth identification for our application. And it basically replaces that, that default web client ID with that OAuth string. So that's what is happening. Now we're going to use these Google sign-in options to set up our new Google API client, or the client. So we'll do in Google API client equals new Google API client dot builder. And then what we need to pass into it is just this activity. And then we'll do dot enable auto manage, and then this will be this and this. Now we need to set up what this is basically a on connection failed listener, so we need to go ahead and implement that here. Implements on connection failed listener. Then we can generate that, the implement methods on connection failed, and we'll deal with that later. So next we'll do a dot add API, and this will be auth dot Google sign-in API, and then we'll pass it our GSO that we created above. And finally we'll build this. Now let's set up the functions of our buttons here. So let's find view by ID, and then we'll give it the r.id.sign-in button, and then set on-click listener, and we'll do this. We'll set that up later. And we'll also set up a sign out button listener. Now let's go ahead and also implement the on-click listener here. On click listener, and we'll have to implement that method as well. There we go. So down here we'll probably just use something like a switch view.get ID, and then we'll say case that it was the r.id.sign-in button. We will sign in, break, case r.id.sign-out button, sign out, break. And while we're down here, let's do also like on the connection failed method, law.d, we'll just do our tag, and then connection failed. So now we need to implement both of those methods. So let's go ahead and create a private void sign in function. And this function basically creates an intent, sign in intent. Let's make sure we bring that in. Equals auth.google signin API dot get sign in intent, and then we'll pass it in our Google Auth API client that we created earlier. Now we'll also do a start activity for results. Start activity for result, and we'll pass it our sign in intent that we just created and the RC code that we created above. Now our sign out function is super easy. Private, if I can spell, private void sign out. And that's basically Firebase auth.getInstance.signout. Done. So next, let's go ahead and generate a on activity. Let's do override methods on activity result. There we go. And what we'll do is just go ahead and keep that. And we'll say if the request code equals the RC signin, then what we'll do is Google sign in results, Google sign in result equals auth dot Google sign in API dot get sign in results from intent, and we'll do the data there. Next, what we'll say is if, so this is now the result has, did we log in or didn't we log in with Google? So what we'll do is if result dot is success, if it was a successful login, then what we'll do is, let's go ahead and do this. Google sign in account equals result dot get sign in account. That's correct, right? Yep, good deal. Sorry, lots of code and I'm having to look both directions. And then we'll do something like a Firebase auth with Google. We'll create that method in a little bit. Now else, we can just log.d tag Google login failed. Sucks. So next, what we're going to do first is go ahead and copy this, and we're going to move it further down here, maybe below this. Paste it there. Now let's create our Firebase with auth method, function rather. Private void Firebase with auth, and this takes in a Google sign-in account, and we'll just call this account. So if you guys remember, previously we requested from Google a request ID token, and that's actually up here if you guys can see. But what we want to do is now use that request token to authenticate with Firebase. So let's go ahead and do that now. We'll say a auth credential, and we'll say credential equals Google auth provider dot get credential, and then we'll say the account that we got sent dot get ID token, and then we'll pass null. I'm not exactly sure what that null does. Somebody may be able to enlighten us in chat. Mauth dot sign in with credential, and we'll pass it in our credential. And then what we'll do is add an on completion listener with our authentication between us and Firebase. So what we'll do is say on complete listener. I believe that's what it is. We'll pass it this and a new on complete listener, and it'll give us the method on complete. And what we'll just say is log.d auth on, or let's do sign in with credential on complete, and then we'll plus task dot is successful, and we'll see what that says. Let's go ahead and trim that up. So finally, there's just two methods we have to implement, and that's the onStart and onStop methods. So let's go ahead and generate those now. Override methods. There is the onStop method, and we want the onStart method. There we go. And the onStart method is basically super simple. All we have to do is say our mauth dot add auth state listener and add our mauth listener. This is basically saying, you know, add our listener to our mauth when we start our application. And onStop is basically if mauth listener does not equal null, then mauth listener, or let's do mauth dot remove auth state listener, mauth listener. There we go. Now we can test our app. So if you hit run, it should boot up your emulator, or you could run it on your phone or whatever you want to do. We got a sign in and sign out button. If we hit sign in, it should take us to a login screen to check our information. Let's see. There we go. Add in your email. Aureli developer gmail.com. Let's see. Actually, I forgot my password here. Accept. Next, next, next. And it failed. If you see down here, incomplete is false, the user logged out. So basically what I forgot is that we need to go to our console here, your Firebase YouTube console, and make sure you have sign in method and enable the Google sign in option. And now we can try it. So if we hit sign in now, it won't ask us for all that crap again. It's already done it. You should see user logged in, and it gave us our email address, aurelideveloper@gmail.com. It says sign in with credential incomplete true. So not only have we authenticated with Google and Google services, and we've received an email address and stuff like that from our Google account, we've also authenticated with Firebase. So now we can use Firebase services like the real-time database engine and stuff like that. So we totally did it. 2 thumbs up, guys. So actually, one more thing before we actually go that I should show you is that the sign out button does work. You can see if you click it, it says auth user logged out, and you can log back in then with the Google button, and it should give you your username or your email address and say that the sign in with credentials to Firebase was completed and that was true for an successful sign in. We can check the Firebase console to see if we're actually signed in. If you go to the Firebase console, click on your application, go to auth, the users panel will be the first thing that it shows you. It'll have the email of the user that is signed in or that has an account with Firebase here, or has an account with your application rather, not Firebase. It will show the provider that they're logged in under, when that account was created, their last sign-in date, and a unique identifier that is the same no matter if the user signs in on an Android device, the web, an iOS device, or however else you can manage to sign them in. So we did it. 2 thumbs up. So that's it for this tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys learned a whole lot. We basically created an app from scratch that uses the Google sign-in button to authenticate with Google, and also authenticates with Firebase so that you can use things like the real-time database engine and storage and stuff like that. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns about this video, go ahead and post them below. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. Most importantly, please check out my Patreon page. I'm just coming back and I'm hoping to get a little bit more support. So I appreciate everybody watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.